bought the upper grade deer stalker, which is a very heavy gauge wire. It's a vinyl wire. Put it up with big poles, and for about 2 years it worked. And finally, the deer figured out at the end of the day, if they want to get in, they're going to get in. They can chew through that stuff. And I had these little slits where they chew through like a curtain and came through. So my son is an engineer, and he came down and said, "I'll put you up a fence so it won't get through." Of course, there go my dollars out the door when he does something. I'm like, "You really need that heavy stuff? Nothing's coming through." Well, we keep King Kong out, trust me. But I have that heavy metal poles this big, nothing's going to work like this. But, whatever's going to work for you.
My daughter thinks she's this uber naturalist organic gardener, but she has an electric fence around her vegetable garden to kill all the birds and rabbits that we come to.
Well, it's funny because in our tried the electric fence, we have environments too, so we have electric fence, with cows and horses. But I got a guy down the road, he's actually a pretty full-time farmer. He grows vegetables, and the way he does it is he uses one strand of electric fence, which I've tried, I just can't do it. And he only runs it 16 inches off the ground, and he's got a complete flow around his garden. His garden is probably about 6 acres, pretty good size. And then you probably heard this, but he'll take peanut butter and every so often rub it on the fence a little bit. And so, peanut butter has salt in it, it's very attractive to deer. That was his main pest. So, they'll come in, they'll kind of lick on it and get a pretty good little buzz when they're doing that. And it kind of spooks them off. And he said it's been working phenomenally for him.
Wow.
I tried that, and my deer are smarter, I think. I mean, they were able to bridge that wire fence I had. They hopped over that thing for about 3 months. Though we didn't put one high enough, I'll just go right over that thing.
Yeah, they jump a 6 foot fence.
They can go over 6 foot fence, yeah. If you start approaching 7.5 feet, they're not making it in. Or if they do, it's not a pleasant sight. So, yeah, they'll go over 6 feet. All right, so let's look at some common problems you'll see out there. I'm going to call these physiological things. These are weather things that are related or not necessarily a disease or insect. Okay? You'll see this early in the season with peppers and tomatoes called tomato leaf roll, called pepper leaf roll. It's on a pepper. But typically, someone may bring you in a plant, and the leaves will just look like they had almost lacked water. Okay, they'll curl up like that. And typically, you're going to see that when people go grab the bonnie plant farm plants that are coming off in February, and they stick them in the ground. That tomato basically says, "Hey, I can't handle this." So it kind of rolls up to try to kind of, if you will, warm up itself, trying to condense. Okay, it's physiological. Most times, if the plant survives from the cold, it grows out of it and it'll open up again. So it's almost always weather related, and usually being too cold for that plant to be on the ground. Blossom end rot, we mentioned that word a couple of times. It is actually calcium deficiency in the cell walls of the fruit. And you always think of tomatoes and blossom end rot, but a lot of things can get blossom end rot. Watermelons, pumpkins, peppers, okay? Squash can get blossom end rot, okay? So it is lack of calcium, but I would say 8 times out of 10, it's not really that the calcium is not in the soil, it's poor irrigation. The plant needs moisture and a good bit of it to pull that calcium up in, bring it up into its cell walls of the fruit. And when moisture is not very consistent, it basically doesn't transport the calcium in. Okay, so you need to have consistent watering. Drip irrigation will help with that. Where do we get calcium? Well, you can buy elemental calcium. Most times when you're putting lime out there, you'll get the calcium. But what is lime? It's magnesium and calcium. Okay. Blotchy ripening, you ever had a tomato you cut open and it's got like a lot of white core in it? Again, that's kind of an environmental thing. It oftentimes is caused by temperature, but more often it's uneven watering. Sometimes it's not even what you're doing, but a little dry period, then all of a sudden, boom, you get hammered with heavy rains, and that plant tries to pull in a lot of water, and you get a very uneven ripening of the fruit. And it's something that sometimes it'll grow out of it. Some varieties seem to be more prone to it. You see it occasionally in pepper, but it's primarily going to be in tomatoes. Okay, sun scald. Yeah, real simple. You and I probably don't function very well. We go outside on a super hot day. We're not wearing a whole lot of hats and sleeves are exposed. We may get burned. Same thing with vegetables. Most vegetables, even though they love to grow in full sun, they like the shade of their leaves. And occasionally, pepper or watermelon or a cucumber or a tomato will kind of be too much exposed to that sun, and they'll get a big brine lesion on there. You know, you can pick it off and cut off the bad side and eat it, but it's just, again, physiological, sun scald. There's no real cure for it other than probably remove that one and hopefully that one's got more leaves around. Okay, cat facing. Okay, this is kind of a funny one because this is the one that creates some rather interesting shaped fruit. I've seen tomatoes that were borderline from everything from comical to pornographic. 4 months from cat facing, and basically it's when the bloom sticks together, usually by temperature. Sometimes two blooms will grow together, or ice will form on it suddenly and kind of grab it, and you get all kinds of funky looking, disfigured fruits. Tomatoes are notorious for this. I went and judged the big state fair up in North Carolina. I was one of the professional judges this past year, and they had tons of categories, but one of them was most unusual fruit. And most of them were, you know, from cat facing, although they were big into sweet potatoes. The sweet potatoes will mutate on their own, but a lot of different weird looking tomatoes. I mean, there was some weird stuff I saw. Anyway, it's physiological, nothing wrong with eating the plant. I mean, the tomato would be perfectly fine. Wouldn't be too sellable if you were marketing them. Fruit cracking, I'm sure you saw this where your tomato kind of blows up at the top. Almost 100% related to too much moisture. Usually the plant's dry, all of a sudden it sucks in a massive amount of rainfall, where you say, oh my gosh, we've got to turn the water on, this water double this week. And it takes in so much, it's like me, you know, going to an Italian Olive Garden, I eat so much I'm just going to explode at the end. And I literally just about do. That tomato, it fills up with water, it can't go anywhere else, and boom, the skin just pops right wide open. Okay? Yeah, not very marketable if you're selling it, but you could eat it all day long. But the reason I'm showing these are, you know, you'll have this come in and immediately someone's going to ask you, what insect is eating this? What disease do I have? Or is this a virus? And you need to know these so that you can say, there's really nothing you can do. It's just environmental. Your life is good. Nothing's going to hurt you. Eat it. You got to learn the easy things so that later on you can detect the disease and stuff.
So if it's the, like, one thing last summer was a bad summer, yeah, just a long period, is there anything you can do, like just maybe aerate the soil around it to try to help plants dry out?
It's normally from like having extremes.
Right.
So keeping mulch around the plants will moderate it a little bit. Doing slow but steady irrigation, like the drip irrigation. Some people irrigate peppers and tomatoes using milk jugs that fill up like a 1 gallon milk jug, put small holes in it. That'll go a long ways to preventing that. It's when it goes, that plant gets very dry, all of a sudden there's a surge of moisture and it's a water hog, then it sucks it up. Sometimes you really can't do a whole lot of rain ahead, you know. But yeah, keeping it kind of moist to start with that. All right, you ever seen this one before? We get this about twice a year.
Is that a tomato?
That's a tomato with orange. Yeah,
Look like suckers.
look like suckers, yeah. Well, after all, remember what the tomato's main goal in life is to reproduce. And so people will take a tomato they harvest. Normally they harvest it a little bit late, and we're talking about trying to get it fresh. But they'll harvest it late, they sit it on the counter, and it just happens to be the perfect climatic conditions. And lo and behold, what's in the tomato? Seeds. The tomato germinates with inside of itself. Like baby's kind of growing out of your stomach or something. It's got little tomato plants coming out. So kind of a novelty, but yeah, so the seeds germinated within the tomato. But you may see that one. All right. I'm going to quickly pop through some nutritional disorders so that you kind of have a little feel if we're ever out diagnosing some stuff. And this is, I mean, welcome to my job. This is the kind of stuff I do all day long. I mean, this stuff comes to me. Sometimes I get baffled. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I've only seen that 4,000 times in my career. I know what it is. All right, so, all right, we know about the pH. That is the first thing I'll do though if I go out to a site or a farm. Let me see what your pH is. I want to know, because that relates to everything on the nutrition, okay? If I know that pH is way off, low or high, yeah, you're going to see all kinds of deficiencies there. You're also going to get more elements that you don't want into that plant. So pH is extremely crucial. Remember we said slightly acidic. We talked about the nitrogen, the miracle grow. Nitrogen deficiency, typically what you're going to see is the lower leaves first are going to start to turn yellow. Okay, a pale yellow, almost a uniform yellow, if you will. Okay, and this might just mean that, hey, you know, they kind of missed that application of fertilizer. Or maybe they didn't put out enough to start with. Maybe there's too much rain in that season and boom, it just kind of leached it through. Okay? So typically lower leaves or more mature leaves, pale. Okay. Phosphorus deficiency. It can be pretty dramatic. Oftentimes in the winter months, particularly if it's real cool out, and you try to slip your plants in a little bit early, phosphorus can be limited, which means it can't pull it in. Phosphorus deficiency, typically you're gonna get like purple in color in the leaves, okay? You might see this in your grass sometimes, particularly centipede does this a lot, okay? And it means that the centipede's phosphorus deficient. It doesn't mean that there's no phosphorus in the soil. It could mean it's so cold right now, it's not pulling it up. Does that make sense? Okay. But, you know, you certainly would want to check. Phosphorus is one of those things, once you put it in the soil, it's very stable, it stays there. You probably could only put phosphorus out once every 5 years and you'd be fine. But sometimes the temperatures will affect how much it's pulled in. Potassium, nitrogen, we're going right down the fertilizer bag, right? Nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, potassium. It can kind of fool you a little bit. On the leaves, sometimes it almost looks like drought bags, where the outer edge will kind of turn brown, but it only goes to a yellow. So if you see that, you know, if you think, gosh, is that a virus? It kind of looks like it. It could be potassium. Also, in the top of the fruits, you're going to start to see a yellow halo in the tomatoes, cucumbers, and the peppers. Okay, calcium deficiency, we talked about the blossom mineral on the left, but what would the foliage look like? Typically, calcium deficiency, the leaves are going to get cupped, which means they're going to start to close up a little bit. A little bit like the tomato leaf roll, but not as extreme. They're just going to close in a little bit, okay? You also get a little bit of yellowing in the leaves near the top. Iron deficiency, I'm sure you're kind of familiar with that. And it can kind of fool you because you first look at it and say, well, it's a lot like the nitrogen deficiency we looked at earlier. It's like nitrogen. But here's the difference. It's going to occur up in the younger, taller part of the plant. Okay, so it's going to be the top part first. If it's yellowing, that's probably going to be iron deficiency. Where does nitrogen occur? Towards the base, right. Also, over time, if you leave it long enough, iron deficiency, you're going to start seeing really green veins, you know, like a finger almost, and the inside of those leaves will be yellow. Okay? And iron deficiency, that can be really associated with pH being off. Okay? Sulfur deficiency, we mentioned sulfur is very particularly for the solanaceous. It can be also confused, you know, with nitrogen, maybe a little bit with the, what was I going to say? What we just looked at? Yeah, with the iron deficiency, but it's going to toward the top. To me, it almost looks more white when you see it than yellow as it starts to fizzle out. Typically, if you are using any of those, we talked about those premium fertilizers, you're not going to see this. But it could be pH related. Okay. Magnesium deficiency, it's very characteristic. It's going to have a strong yellow foliage, particularly towards the bottom of the plant. Magnesium is one of those things that could be provided if you're putting lime out, magnesium and calcium. I don't have to remember all this, but it's just kind of good to know stuff. All right. Boron deficiency. Boron deficiency, you're going to usually see what we call hollow heart. You're going to open up a pepper, you're going to open up a potato, in this case, like cauliflower, and it's going to be hollow inside. Okay? It'll be like a crevice or cavity that could easily be boron deficiency. Boron is not something you need a lot of, but you do need it in the soil. Minute amount. Yes?
Oh, no, sorry.
Oh. I got a question. Okay, let's jump to insects real quick. And I don't know if you're probably going to have another insect class, but remember that probably 95% of everything out there is good insects, but we do have a few critters. Cabbage looper. If you grow any of the, the broccoli, the cabbages, the greens, at some point in the winter, you're probably going to run into this guy. He loves to tunnel his way through your cabbage and other type brassicas and winter vegetables. Okay, not too hard to control from a chemical standpoint. You could use 7 liquid, would probably be very effective. Bifenthrin would kill them. From a organic side, the BT we talked about would probably be pretty good. Colorado potato beetle, a really colorful looking little fella. He will not only just get onto potatoes, but he'll get onto tomatoes and other type solanaceous crops. Kind of looks like he's harmless, but he'll chew up a lot of leaves. You'll see these early in the season. A lot of times, you can hand pick them and just squash them, or you can spray them with one of the, from an organic standpoint, pyrethrin or neem oil will work pretty good. You got to kind of hit them though. You got to kind of coat them with it. Okay, aphids are ubiquitous. I mean, they're everywhere in many different types. They're a very easy insect to kill, but they're prolific in their reproduction, so you have to stay up with it. You might see them appear on almost any one of your vegetables. Really tiny little insects. They're distinguished. They have two little tailpipes coming out of the back. They're sort of pear-shaped. How you can tell that's an aphid. Okay, just have to stay up. You can use things like liquid soap and water, or what we call safer soap, and just smother them. And if you coat it a little bit, you'll kill them. But you just have to watch for them. They like to be on the undersides of leaves. They'll crawl up okra. They love the stickiness of okra, and they'll get up on them. Spider mites are tricky because you don't really see them. I mean, that's a very magnified thing to the right. I've never really had a big problem on spider mites, but they will get on beans sometimes, and your leaves will kind of get a speckly silver appearance. If you suspect spider mites, just take a white piece of paper and shake your leaves on it really hard, and then look at the paper. You probably see these tiny little red dots, about the size of a pinpoint, walking around. And if you do that, you're probably going to need to treat them with some type of a crop oil, or we call like a horticulture oil, to smother them. We talked about the eggplant flea beetles. Flea beetles are not actually fleas, but they're given that name because they kind of hop like them. But they can, I would say they're more problem. I've seen them on corn before. They'll get on corn, but they love eggplant. They'll just whittle your eggplant with holes. It doesn't kill the eggplant, but it takes out the vigor of the plant. So any of the organic options we talked about should work for that. From a non-organic standpoint, bifenthrin would be fine. Oh, there's our nasty little guy we talked about. So that's the squash vine borer, the little guy that loves to tunnel through your squash and take up residence. He's a fat little grubby guy. Now, there is a somewhat of a cure if you detect these in there early. It's not the easiest thing. I've done it before, it works. So if you happen to see that you got a little penetrating hole and sometimes it'll ooze out some sap, you can take like an X-Acto blade or a very sharp pocket knife and very carefully start gorging out a little edge of that squash where the hole is. And eventually you'll find them. You'll see them in there. So you kind of poke them, have fun, torture them, kill him, okay? And then just take some soil and pile it up along that wounded area, put the mulch back. Oftentimes that plant will heal itself and it'll continue to go. But you may be doing it like 2 weeks later, you might have another one in there, so you have to kind of watch it. You know, you go on a squash, you don't have time to do that, but you got 4 or 5 plants, you can nurse them or whatever, yeah, you can do that. Stink bugs, in general, they love to feed on okra. If you ever get okra, the typical sign would be someone will say, what's wrong with my okra? It'll come with a bunch of bumps all over, look like warts, okay? That's probably 1 or 2 things. It's either stink bugs or it's leaf-footed bugs. People may not see them, and sometimes they'll feed at night and they're gone and they're looking at them. So, you know, you might have to use a more residual control to hit them. Otherwise, you have to be out there when they are, hit with a spray, an organic spray. But they are pretty tenacious, and you can still eat the okra if it's got the bumps on it. It doesn't look very remarkable. Corn earworm, it's hard to grow sweet corn without getting corn earworms. The way I look at it, 9 times out of 10, they're only in the very top of the ear. I don't know what I'm talking about. Little caterpillar, you just take a knife and cut that part off, and life is good. Some people just can't tolerate. I know I've eaten away some really good corn before. People are like, look at me, have this worm thing on the end. I'm like, look at my corn. It's good corn. To me, it just means you got really good corn when they find it. They're giving you the seal of approval. Yeah, there's a couple of tricks. You can spray one of the things like 7 bifenthrin on the corn when it's silking and maybe it controls it. Some people say you can take mineral oil, put it on the tips of the ear, and it'll kill the worm. Honestly, I've never worried about it. I just cut it off. You won't have it on every ear, but you know when they find it, they're pretty. You'll see the moths. The moths will be flying around and eventually they'll, oh, isn't that pretty? No, not from the gardening standpoint, but they're coming to your corn. Nematodes can be a problem, particularly if you don't rotate your crops like we talked about. I see it a lot sometimes in okra, tomatoes, things like such. There's no real good controls anymore. We don't really have any good corn or chemicals to recommend. Tilling the soil frequently will help to dry and expose them, and rotating the crops are probably the best recommendations.
I've heard people put black plastic in sterilizing their soil.
Maybe I should have a slide on that. I'll bring something to say. It's a good one. Disease and virus control, the key is to find it early. First, let me say, virus can sometimes look like herbicide damage. It's kind of curled, crinkled, distorted looking foliage. There's no control presently for viruses, really. We have resistant varieties that grow, but once you get a virus, you just about need to remove it from the garden. There's not a spray out there, okay? Okay, soil management, making sure we have well-drained soils, we don't overwater them, can certainly kind of go a long way. The resistant varieties mean just that. It doesn't mean it won't get a disease or it's not going to get a nematode. It's resistant to it, so there's a fighting chance. We have very few varieties out there that say immune. Immune and resistant are two different words. Okay. There's a downside to some having resistance, particularly in tomato oil and meat. The more resistant the tomato is to meat, the less flavor it seems to have. And there's been sort of a surge for people to grow old varieties because they really love the flavor. The downside is it's trickier because you have more issues. Okay, talk about ventilation, I mentioned that, rotation we talked about. Here's where I want to get, here's your solarization. Okay, so this is how I would recommend not to solarize. Solarization, in a nutshell, basically is, to keep it simple, it's heating the soil up underneath plastic to try to kill organisms underneath. Even as hot as we get in Georgia, it's not extraordinarily effective. And it really only kills maybe what's in the top half to 1 inch of soil. So here's our advice. If you're going to try solarization, and we've done it at the garden before, and it does help. First of all, don't use black plastic. You want to use 2 sheets of clear plastic, okay? And the reason is this: black plastic will actually shade underneath more and keep a cooler environment, believe it or not, than 2 clear sheets of plastic that allows the sun through. So if I'm going to solarize a raised bed or a traditional garden, here's what you want to do. You want to till that area up that you're going to solarize, till it up thoroughly, and then water it really well. So get it pre-saturated with water, okay? And then take 2 sheets of plastic, and you can just get the run-of-the-mill plastic at Home Depot. We can spend a ton of money on it. And then cover that site over. You're going to have something, rocks, soil, boards to hold it down. Obviously, it's going to be blowing all over the place. I would do that during the warmest months if you can, and allow that to sit for a minimum of a month. If you sit a month and a half, 2 months, that would be great. Okay, now here's the real key. Next time you plant that area, okay, when you pull that plastic up, the key now is not to retill it. That's where some people make a mistake. If you retill it, you're going to be bringing up some of that disease and weeds from below. Remember, it's only going to kill about what's in the top inch. So yeah, you can likely rake it to smooth it out, and then go in there and plant right into that soil the way it is. And you'll probably see some appreciable differences in your weeds, possibly disease. So something to try. I do it on a small scale. So 2 sheets of clear plastic, much better than the black plastic. Okay, talk about steering plant times. Just some virus prevention. Certainly, a real common virus in the garden for people that smoke is tobacco mosaic virus. It's deadly on most plants. It will kill them. Even if you smoke and don't smoke in the garden, if it's on your clothes, when people smoke, it sticks to their clothes. You're kind of a walking time bomb when you're in your garden. So that tobacco actually has a virus in it that can get into the vegetables. Okay. So remember, we're going to remove those viruses. Not what you can do once you get them in there.
When did they discover that tobacco? I think about when I was growing up, all the farmers anywhere when I went they were all heavy smokers.
It's been a while. It's probably since like the 40s that knew about it, but yeah, it probably didn't stop them, but yeah.
Where do you put those diseased plants though? So you can't compost them, right?
Okay, so if you have a virus plant, I'm not even so sure I would compost it. It may not get hot enough. I'd probably put it in a burn pile if you could and burn it. Or, if you have trash, pick it up, put it in the trash and take it off to the landfill.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I certainly wouldn't pull it up and lay it right on the ground right there. That's like, put gasoline next to a fire. Couldn't get it out. Okay. I want to mention a little bit about grafting tomatoes real quick. One of the preventions for disease and things like that are grafted varieties. You may have heard, you can buy grafted old varieties, like some people love the old Homestead or one called German. And so it's difficult to grow, but you can buy grafted varieties. And it's true. If you look a lot of the catalogs now, you can go ahead and just order a grafted variety. The downside is, they're expensive. One tomato plant will probably cost you around $13 to $15. And what is it? It's basically, it's taking the rootstock off a very hardy variety, and normally it's some kind of named rootstock, which is the bottom part. But you could graft your own. You could get something like a Better Boy or a Big Beef, say, and graft a heirloom variety on top of that. And the theory is, the rootstock is going to bring in some of that resistance to disease and viruses and everything else up into the scion, which is the top part, which is going to produce a flavorful fruit. And in some areas it's worked brilliantly. Haven't tried it. We grafted our own and planted at the station. I haven't seen any miraculous consequences of going through all this effort. They're not that hard to graft, and all. That's a website right there. You can watch it being done. But it's not that hard to do. They're expensive to buy. I don't think it's worth the extra expense for what the payback is. But that being said, they got all kinds of weird stuff now out there. There's actually a tomato variety out there called fries and ketchup, I think it's called. But think about that for a second. Why would it be called fries and ketchup? What does that sound like? What are fries from? Right. Are they the same family? They sure are. Okay, most things in the same family can be grafted. So some genius has found that you can take the base or the rootstock of a potato and actually successfully graft a tomato on it. So you can have tomatoes on the top, potatoes on the bottom. Kind of a cool idea. I haven't grown one yet. I might try to do it. But from a management standpoint, completely different when you manage those two. So it's kind of interesting. But yeah, it can be done. Actually, I taught a fruit program the other day on Gwinnett, and we were talking about the cocktail tree. And that's kind of another little thing. I don't know if you heard of a cocktail tree. But it's basically a fruit tree that's got several different fruits grafted on. So you have like, orange coming out of here, apple there, lemon there. It's just craziness. But grafting is out there. If you want to buy a graft plant, here's a couple of things. When you get it, it's going to look really weak. They're much weaker looking than a traditional plant when you first get them. They'll catch up eventually. But I have seen just about as much disease ungrafted in the state of Georgia than I have growing them from the start. So I wouldn't spend the money to do my advice, because that things you don't want to play with. All right, herbicide damage we talked about, be real careful. You can use Roundup in your vegetable garden, glyphosate, but just know that if a tomato even sees the label of Roundup, it's gonna get it, because they're very sensitive. So you have to really use some type of a cover. I'd be real careful. Roundup's only soil active, but it's only foliar active. If it blows into some of the vegetables, you're in trouble. Okay. Talk about being careful with manures. Just realize when you see herbicide damage, whether it comes from manure or you spraying, it looks a lot like virus, and sometimes it's very hard to tell. I do a lot of diagnostics where I got to go back and ask the agent, tell me about the history, blah, 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 blah. On your agent listserv, I see where people put things out, and no one's really sure whether it's a virus or it's herbicide. You do a little more digging. So they mimic each other because they tend to discolor, make them shrivel up, and do kind of all kind of funky things. We call it shoestring, where it makes the leaves get very thin. So you have to kind of do a little digging, but if you find out that they've been using fresh manure, it could be that it was a herbicide problem. Or, this is a real common one, people will swear they didn't spray anything, they didn't use any manure. Of course, I'm only as good as I'm sitting on the telephone talking to an agent or a person, and then lo and behold, on a few that we've actually followed up and figured out, there's the neighbor right next door was spraying their yard for winter weeds, with weed beat on. Well, what's weed beat on? Weed beat on is 2,4-D plus MCPP plus dicamba, all little nasties when it comes to the vegetables. And all it takes is a breeze about like we've got today, and that minimal drip comes into your vegetable garden, and if you're my neighbor, you could be right behind that door there just about. It's got you. So yeah, you didn't spray a thing that your neighbor did, or it could be 2 doors down, get you. So, I've heard those calls before. Sure, you get them all the time. This is one of the usually early in the season, when we talk about the Roundup, it's real easy to diagnose, because you're going to see. If you get particularly the tomato plants are real prone to it. If you start seeing a tomato and the leaves are just going completely white at the top, and the little tips might still be green, I can just about guarantee you, someone somewhere in that neighborhood is spraying some glyphosate. And I'll probably get 10 or 15 of these every year will come in. I don't even Roundup And people say, well, will it live? And the question is, I don't know. Depends on how much it takes. The way glyphosate and Roundup's a trade name, so there's all kinds of different trade names for it. But the way the chemical works, it goes in through the stomatas of the leaves. So the leaves have got little openings, and it sucks in this stuff. Okay, so it sucks in the herbicide, and translocates it down into the root system. If it takes up enough of it, over time it's going to kill it. If it's a very, very minor damage, it might live through it. In my experience with tomatoes, most times it's going to get it. They're not very hardy. Okay. Here's our little Buddha baby tomato. What was wrong with that tomato? Cat facing, right? Yeah, I forgot I had that on there. Kind of looks like Buddha. Or you can come up with other things. So, all right. We get the lot time again. I'm gonna leave some time for questions and see what I missed. But kind of a lot of stuff to digest. But I love growing vegetables, love growing fruits. If you've never done it before, I say, yeah, try a little. I did a program the other day up at the Georgia Green Industry, which is running landscape. We talked about how to incorporate vegetables into the landscape. And I talked about, how we could do it just on a small scale with containers, with window boxes, have your own herb garden. We have a lot of herbs at our house. And even, I know I was talking to a gentleman back here, I'm just growing in a wheat bed. You can make a whole garden just with wheat bales. You can grow tomatoes, peppers, beans, whatever you want. So you don't have to have, just don't think, well, this doesn't pertain to me because I don't have room. If you've got, an area in an apartment that's got a place that gets a little bit wide, you can grow vegetables. We've grown right out of a bag of soil. We just take a bag of good old topsoil, Home Depot, put it there, put 2 tomatoes in, fertilize it, grow it right out of the bag. So don't make much. So anyway, questions?
I heard people doing that with potatoes. Does that work for them?
Yeah, the potatoes, they like to get decked. So people are growing that. We've grown in wheelbarrows before. People grow them in tires. So potatoes, the thing about potatoes, we're talking about white potatoes. When you plant them, you want to plant them deep anyway. So most people plant them like 2 inches deep. I plant mine 8 inches deep. And it'll be 3 weeks before you ever see anything. And all of a sudden you'll start seeing the shoots come out of there. Interesting thing about potatoes, I'm diverting here. Most people don't realize this, but no matter how you plant them, come early summer, maybe a couple months in the summer, all of a sudden you're going to see them bloom, right? And they're in the tomato family, so they look a little bit similar. So they're going to go to bloom. When they go to bloom, it signals that you actually have potatoes down there already. And so you can reach underneath carefully and feel for them, and you'll find little potatoes about that big. You've ever heard the term new potatoes? That's where it comes from. It's just baby potatoes, but you're not getting them all. You're only getting the ones you can harvest real easy. The other ones go down deeper, and you leave them for big daddies when you go on the treasure hunt at the end of the summer. So yeah, you can do that, no doubt. Yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering, if there was a pot about this big, and you put 1 tomato in there, is it hurt to plant like basil around it?
What could you put around it? Yeah, you could probably incorporate some herbs. I would normally recommend for tomatoes, if you're going to do that container, a minimum of a 3-gallon container. 5 gallons would be much better. The key would be make sure you have good drainage holes in it. When you do the drainage holes, and I don't know where you're going to put this container, it's going to have concrete or where it is. I would, if it doesn't already have drainage holes, I put the drainage holes on the side if you could. It kind of keeps nasties from coming up to the bottom. Okay, if that makes sense. A lot of people grow them like in a 5-gallon Home Depot bucket or something. So.
Well, I have pots that
are
this tall, and then I have feet on the bottom, and the drainage is the bottom.
Okay. I would probably take, if that foot underneath there holds the water, I don't know if it does when it comes through, I'd probably remove that, allow the water to run out unless
Oh,
it's.
no, it runs, no,
Okay.
I just can't feed it.
Oh, I got what you're saying. It's kind of actually elevated. Yeah, that's perfect. And then underneath that tomato, you can plant a container of anything. You can put anything from small annual flowers in there. You could, depending on, what you enjoy eating, you could stuff a few radishes around there, some herbs. You probably couldn't go with rosemary because it's grown to a shrub, so to speak. But yeah, a little bit of thyme, oregano, whatever. Be perfect. Perfect.
You mentioned cutting out the corn worms. Are there other things that we saw today that you could still eat or maybe you can sell to somebody else? I mean, somehow you just have to show that.
Well, here's a good one. Again, I didn't want to talk to you about selling and marketing, because I mean, most people say it's not what they're going to do here. But, we grow a lot of bunches of tomatoes on our farm. And I would say, you know how it is, the premium great tomatoes, that's about just half of them less. the losers that got blemishes, and, that's the majority. You're just gonna get a lot of damage. But we put them in a 5-gallon bucket, and we mark them as canning tomatoes. And people just eat those things up in mind, because they're gonna have some blends on them. And to answer your question, yeah, I mean, most vegetables are not gonna be flawless. Cucumbers are going to be pretty perfect. And so forth. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question. Yeah, there's always hope for most vegetables, even if they've got the cat facing and the food grade, we can eat them all. It's when you come to market, some people, you need to let them know what they're getting. Particularly they know we grow kind of natural organic, so we always say, we put it in our little ad, and we grow natural organic. Expect to see a little damage, but that's because we're not hammering them with every pesticide out there.
But then maybe not one.
No, worm damage is kind of tricky, because you start getting squash, it's got pickle worm and all, it's got holes in it. No, you can't do that. I mean, you can eat that. When you cut it up, do whatever you want to, but it's just yourself.
No, I'm not saying, I'm just thinking.
Yeah, but I mean, the worm's not gonna hurt you. I mean, you cut them right out there, fry them up with the zucchini or whatever, lots of good. More protein. Yeah.
Tomatillos grow?
I'm sorry, could you?
Do tomatillos grow?
Yes, absolutely.
They're not in the tomato.
No, you don't see them very much, but if you look at that, totally tomatoes catalog, they'll have those. You can grow them.
Where would you get potato eyes to plant?
Okay, so when you go to plant potatoes, you don't want to just grab them out of the supermarket. Lo and behold, if you ever done a science project before and cut them up and stuck them in a glass of water, they will grow. But they are treated with a growth retardant to keep them from spudding or putting out growth too quickly, so you don't want that. In most cases, and I've seen them like in Home Depot and all, if you get a good feed store, sometimes Tractor Supply will do it. I mean, I don't know what's up here. If you've got any kind of feed store, or you can order online. All the places I talked about will sell them online. You'll get called seed potatoes. Oftentimes they're going to be a small potato about this big. It could be a big potato. And then what I'll do is I'll cut it in 3 or 4 pieces. I want a piece roughly a little bigger than about the size of a golf ball, and each one will have a little eye or spud on it. Okay, so you can get them from the catalogs, but if I can, I'd rather buy them local from a feed store. Or I say Tractor Supply may carry them. But that's what you're looking at. And you're only basically selecting between a red and a white variety, and there's different names, varieties that goes with that. But that's a cool season, so I would want to plant those probably around the first part of March is when you get them in the ground. So.
What do you think of square foot gardening and meals mixed as a medium?
Okay, I heard the first part. Well, I'm very hard to hear about
Oh,
it.
I'm sorry. What do you think? Square foot gardening and meals mix as a medium?
Okay, I don't know about metals, but square foot gardening, is that off flower we got or whatever?
It's, yeah, you put a grid down, but the mix
Yeah.
that you recommend in the mix is a third course, and if you like, a third peat moss, and a third multiple places.
Okay, I got you. Yeah, I don't see any problem with that recipe. We've tried many different recipes. In fact, we do a whole course, a whole program we do on raised bed gardening. It's interesting because we get all kinds of trials at UGA. And just having it as a raised bed, you'd be amazed at what benefits you get. Because we use garden soil right out of the garden, the clayey, loamy stuff, put it in the raised beds, and in all honesty, the results, even though they weren't as good, they weren't that much worse than having all those fancy mixes there. So to answer your question, square foot gardening is intense gardening where you're putting, a limited quantity in each square foot. Your spacing can be sometimes becomes problematic. Some plants are just really want to get big. So when I do raised bed gardening, I don't really do the square foot, but I do condense things a little tighter than I would feel comfortable with in a traditional garden. But I don't get them as tight as what they say. My ideal mix I put in my raised beds, and again, there's many different formulas. We have a lot of compost on the farm because we have animals, so I'm going to call it composted manure that's been sitting there that I know the history of. So I'm using some kind of manure. You might not have that, so you can go get like black cow manure or something like that. It's been composted. And then into that, I'm typically, we also have a standard compost pile, but you can buy compost, which is basically going to be, kind of a vegetative matter done in some type of a topsoil. You can buy a really good screening topsoil. Those 3 things will be fine. You can use peat moss. I just would not go heavy with it. Peat moss is one of those things that is very hard to wet, and once you get it wet, it's hard to dry. Okay. So that would be kind of a good mix. I would stay away from using sand. Some people like to put sand in there. If you don't get the ratio right, it'll actually harden it like concrete. So. But that works pretty well for me.
A comment about the growing tomatoes in a pot. I did that one year because I didn't have room for gardening, and I didn't have very good success, but I realized later I was using potting soil instead of a regular garden soil, and that did not work very well.
Yeah, so you have to be real careful when it comes to the soils in general. A lot of what they call the potting soil, just in that, a lot of those are pretty dry medium. Many of them are made from just 90% ground up pine bark.
Yeah.
And while it could be done, it's just the water management on it's terrible. So it probably would not be the ideal thing for a vegetable to grow. So I would want to have more bona fide soil in there, or at least I would have to start mixing in some other things.
Now, the second year I built up some soil and mixed some compost with it.
Yeah.
That worked all right, very good.
Yes, you have to be really careful what you buy. You don't never know what's going to be in the bag.
My wife's had good success, like I said, with straw bale gardening, especially with
Yes,
tomatoes. What would be the chemical or physiological reason why that works so well without using any soil?
Well, some people actually use soils in the straw bales. Depends on how.
She doesn't, she just plants.
Yeah. So the straw bale, or the thing is, typically what you do is you'll get a bale of either oat or wheat straw. Typically you wouldn't use Bermuda. It's a little bit too dense, but the wheat straw's got good aeration in it. And she said she had her own formula, but we normally tell people that it's about 3 weeks out, start to wet the bale down considerably. So spray it every day with water. And what happens is it starts to biodegrade a little bit. You might see a few mushrooms or something pop up in it. But it's kind of breaking down, okay? Then what we do, normally about the second week, we take a little 10-10-10 fertilizer and spread it on top. And that'll keep the microorganisms chewing on it. So it makes it just a little mushy on top, but not too bad. And then directly into that, we put transplants, tomatoes, peppers, whatever. Where we take potting soil or some type of garden soil is if we're going to plant seeds in there. If we take a little soil, kind of hover out of place and put a little soil in there and put seeds in it. And so it acts as a raised bed. It's got a lot of aeration. It's keeping the plant from contacting the ground, which is very good disease preventative. So it's kind of like a glorified raised bed that's got a ton of air coming in there. And that's one of the ways. Now, why doesn't it work sometimes? Is if you don't get the water management right on it, you let it go too dry, and you have to really watch it, because the water hits that thing, it can go right through it. So
Drip water.
yeah, and if the bales happen to have some issues, you never know what's in a thing of wheat straw. And you hope you got pure wheat straw, but if you have crabgrass or anything else, an animal will eat anything, you can start popping up with that. But that's a great way to do it. Yeah, if you look online, just that I don't think I got a on that one, but if you look at straw bale gardening, you probably get a lot of good ideas on it. It's a cool way to try it.
She uses one application of, and she has a hard time finding it, it's ammonium nitrate.
Yeah.
34, she's like urea better, if I can get it, but there's a couple of farm stores you can.
Yeah.
So that's one of the applications that she uses.
You probably will find calcium nitrate a little easier now. Ever since 9/11, it's been hard to buy 3400 ammonium nitrate. Now where I live, you can buy it all day long, but probably up around Atlanta, you might look at it like, when are you going to blow up? You want one bag of fertilizer, But yeah, anything that's high nitrogen will help with that. So, and I've seen a couple places where they take straw bales. I've never done it to this extent. I mean, they'll have almost like traditional rows of straw bales, and they put metal stakes in. They've got guy wire, so they put the tomatoes up and the beans and everything else. So, pretty cool. Yes.
My parents had one in Blue Ridge, Georgia, in the basement. I found a lot of chemicals, gardening, and things like that. I went to the Forestry Service, but they wouldn't take it. I could not find a place to get rid of these old chemicals. I need a suggestion.
You got chlorine?
I mean, some of this is 40.
Most counties take chlorine too. Yeah, so the question is, where to dispose of these old chemicals? Louis probably answered that better than I do. I know some of the agents sometimes have what's called amnesty days, where they have chemical collections and no questions asked, whatever. You get in trouble for anyway, but so that occurs sometimes. You know, if there's anything like that, I've seen it before.
There are what's called clean days, but they're very far few between because the EPA lost their funding for that. So what you do is just keep your air down. You might have to travel a bit, and you have to pay to drop them off, then you get rid of everything at once. We have not had one in Forsyth or the surrounding counties for a while. We got one doing that a few years back.
Good question. I had that one before. I said, there's probably plenty of county agents that are just take what you've got, and they say, oh, I'm gonna use for this. She may have DP in there, going back. Yes, sir.
Have you ever had any success like planting marigolds around tomatoes? Will that keep the bugs away?
Yeah, it's a great question. So yeah, you know, the old wives' tale or whatever is, you know, put marigolds in the garden or plant garlic or whatever, you keep away the bugs.
Right.
Bigfoot vampires and all that stuff. Yeah, it's not really that cracked up like that. Here's where I look at it. We always plant color in the garden, whether it be in a raised bed or whatever. We dedicate one area of the garden or one raised bed to color. My primary goal is I'm bringing in beneficials. So I want pollinators and I want blue guys that will go out and beat up the bad guys. Unless you put a solid bed of marigolds around each tomato, the only thing that would actually probably trap out would be if nematodes were trying to work their way through the moisture to there. It might block them from that. But as far as flying insects or whatever, it's not going to stop them from one iota. So, but will they act as a beneficial? Yeah. As far as bringing in pollinators and stuff, I think it's more of a benefit that way. Okay. Good question.
Can you give us any secrets on root vegetables like beets? Is there any like secrets to?
I might hear you again, because again, I'm like, only hear one ear. So.
Any secrets to root vegetables like beets or carrots to get them to develop?
Yeah, so the root vegetables, carrots, and well, I mean, actually, you know, when you plant turnips, that's a root vegetable. You know, I lived up north before, and up there they don't eat the tops; they just eat the bottom. They throw away the top. But I think the secret is they need a pretty loose soil so that they can expand, and particularly carrots. Carrots are really tough. You got a lot of clay, so raised beds work wonderful for carrots and beets as well. If they get confined from heavy clay soils, I think the problem is they're just not going to expand as much as they should. So I want to see more amendment in there, or raised beds or containers, and I think they'll do fine, because most of those things you just mentioned will grow perfectly well here. I mean, I've grown some big turnips before. My grounds are pretty well worked. If they hit heavy clay, particularly carrots, they're going to stunt, you know. And most times we recommend it more towards, there are varieties that are made for heavier soils or more of a stumpy looking type carrot.
Okay.
But yeah, the key would be just working that soil, fluffing it up, or going raised. So I think we're probably out of time. I'll probably run for a second or two. But
That was great. Let's thank John. We have a 1 hour lunch. Please be back for our next speaker right at 1 o'clock. Yeah.